School board meeting will now commence. This time I'd like to do the roll call. Carla Hernandez.
Here.
Cassandra Goldman. Goldman.
Here.
Suhana Medina. Thomas Evans.
Present.
Dorian Reed.
Present.
Jordana Giri.
Present.
And we have Ulrica Calderon Vallejo, who is absent.
No,
She's
present.
here? Sorry about that. We have quorum. Next item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is administration of votes to the school board members.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can use my principal voice.
Dr. Friedman, let me just make an announcement for you again. We do have interpreters here for anyone who needs it.
Is there
And since
anyone? Yes. Anyone who needs interpreter?
Si alguien necesita interpretación de idioma español al inglés, aquí hay para eso. Gracias.
Okay. My name is Dr. Sarah Friedman. I'm the Chief of Education for the City of Central Falls, and it is my honor to welcome our new school board members, as well as our amazing community on this very historic occasion to celebrate a major milestone for the community of Central Falls in regaining power over our education system for this community. As many of you know, the Central Falls state takeover is the longest in the history of the United States of any school district that's been under state control. It's been over 34 years that the state of Rhode Island has been making decisions on behalf of the children of our community and not having the local community have the full voice and power of the school committee. Today, what we're about to do in welcoming the leadership of our new school board members is a reflection of the work of decades of dedicated community members and community leaders from the community of Central Falls who have always been fighting for, advocating, and being the voice for the children of this community. It is also a celebration of the incredible talent and commitment and how much our community cares about our community's children. So with that, I am pleased to turn this over to our Mayor Maria Rivera, who will swear in our school board members.
And thank you all for being here. I want to start by thanking our soon-to-be newly elected and appointed school board members for really stepping it up. Serving on a school board requires time, thoughtfulness, and commitment. And I truly believe we have an amazing group of leaders who will help move our education forward here in Central Falls. This moment represents a turning point for Central Falls. After decades, our families, educators, and community members are stepping into leadership roles to help guide our schools forward. This took lots of collaboration, trust building, and hard work. I'm incredibly proud of our community and our new school board for reaching this milestone together that puts our students and families first. And I'm honored to swear in the new Central Falls School Board today. But first I want to acknowledge Mr. Jesus, who is a student who's with us today, who is also going to be on the school board, but she's going to be sworn in once she turns 18 in the month of March. And we're very, very proud of having him join the school board at that time. So we'll hold another celebration for you. So with that, I am going to start by swearing in our elected. So I'm going to ask Erika Vallejo, Suhana Medina, Isandra Paneto, and Carla Hernandez to please stand up. And if you could please raise your right hand. Do you, Erika Vallejo, Suhana Medina, Lisandra Paneto, Carla Hernandez, were duly elected to the office of the Central Falls School Board, solemnly swear to be true and faithful unto the state, to support the Constitution of the state and of the United States, and truly and faithfully execute your duties until another be engaged in your place or until you be legally discharged therefrom, so help you God. Congratulations. We're gonna have time for hugs and kisses and congratulations real quick because then they have to go to a meeting. But now we're gonna swear on our appointed members. So if I could have Dorian Ray, Thomas Evans, and your Donna Ruggieri, please stand up. And if you could please raise your right hand. Do you, Dorian Ray, Thomas Evans, Jordana Ruggieri, were duly elected to the office of the Central Falls School Board, solemnly swear to be true and faithful unto the state, to support the Constitution of the state and of the United States, and truly and faithfully execute your duties until another be engaged in your place or until you be legally discharged therefrom, so help you God. Congratulations.
At this time, the next item on the agenda is election of officers. At this time, we will hold an election for chair of the board. Is there a nomination for the chair?
Make a motion, nominate Dorian as the president for the school board.
Dorian Rave is nominated. Are there any other nominations? Is there a second?
Second.
Sir Evans seconded the nomination. For Dorian Rave is now nominated. Are there any other nominations?
Just for the chair.
For the chair.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Mr. Dorian Rave, you are now the chair. At this time, we will hold the election for the vice chair of the board. Is there a nomination?
I make a nomination for Pia Carla Hernandez as vice president for the school board.
The nomination is for Carla Hernandez. Is there a second?
I second.
Mr. Dorian Reed has seconded the nomination of Ms. Carla Hernandez. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Ms. Carla Hernandez, you are now the vice chair. At this time, we will hold the election for the board secretary. Is there a nomination for the secretary?
I make a motion, Pia Thomas as secretary.
Thomas Evans has been nominated. Is there a second?
A second.
We have a second from Mr. Giordano Ruggieri. Mr. Evans, you are now nominated. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Mr. Evans, you are now the secretary. Next item on the agenda is approval of records. Approval of meeting minutes of the Central Falls School Board members on December 9, 2025.
I'm gonna hand out their packets.
I no longer part of the
transition process.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break for about 5 minutes while we transition over to the meeting.
Celebrate with your loved ones.
Celebrate.
Some days it's good. It's okay, we're at that. Maybe in a couple of I understand.
That's a good photo.
Have all of the new school board members stand up here for a photo of all of you, please.
Okay. Actually, you can a little bit more distant, but still reading pretty clearly.
I have to fold it up first and then I'll stick it in.
Yeah, we're just setting up the room.
All right. 1, 2,
Thanks for the student.
How the real work begins.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so when you're all ready, on top.
We're on a tight schedule.
My first one in up there, but sit somewhere you can
The next item on the agenda is the approval of records. Can I get a motion to approve the records?
Motion, sir.
Seconded? Approval of the records. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Motion passes 7-0.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next item on the agenda under new business is presentations and discussions. Under I is Open Meetings Act, access to public records. Act, ethics laws, and parliamentary procedures, a legal basis for school board members by Central Falls City Solicitor, Matthew Jason.
Good evening, everyone. Do you have a copy of this packet in your packet?
Yes.
Great. So it's nice in big font. I'm gonna just kind of go through this page by page. What I would say is feel free to interrupt with any questions. I don't want this to be interactive. These are all kind of the fundamental laws that impact you as a board. You'll get into later today with Amanda more of your policy requirements. I'd also like to introduce Charles Ruggiero, who many of you have met. Am I right? Charles is an attorney, works with the Central Falls Law Department on a number of issues, and will be working with the school board moving forward. So he's gonna jump in on this presentation as well as the next one because of his expertise. He's been general counsel and has worked with many school boards across Rhode Island. Sound good? Great. So we're gonna start with the Open Meetings Act. The Open Meetings Act, the purpose of this is to ensure that the public knows about and can participate in any major decision that impacts their community. So, largely speaking, you have to, as a school board, meet in a public location with members of the public, with potentially members of the media, and you're required to do so under the law. What that means is you can't meet in secret, you can't make decisions in secret, and everything needs to go on the record. We have cameras that are working here. We have, that'll be transcribed when you approve your meeting minutes. Those go on the Secretary of State's website. And everything is recorded for the historical record. So every decision that you make is official, it's documented, and members of the public and members of the media can track that. It promotes transparency, accountability, and public confidence in the government. That's a general reason why there's a requirement for open meetings. Now the question is, what is a meeting? If you, Chairman Rave, are talking to Ms. Ruggieri in the hallway and you talk about something on the agenda, is that a meeting? And are is that somehow violating the Open Meetings Act? The answer is no. What constitutes an open meeting is a quorum of your school board. Now, who knows how many people of your board make up a quorum?
I believe it's 3, right?
4. It's always a majority. So you're 7 now. When you're fully constituted, you'll have 9, so it'll be 5. But for purposes of you now, you have 7 sworn-in members of the board, so your quorum is 4. So if 4 of you, over the phone or over email or in the hallway, meet and talk about an issue related to the school board, you're violating the Open Meetings Act. So generally speaking, if something's on the agenda or is potentially going to be on the agenda, you know it's going to be on the agenda, you can't talk about it with 4 or more people. That's called a quorum, violating the quorum, or the fancy term of art is a rolling quorum, which means, Dorian, if you call Thomas and say, hey, how are you going to vote on this? And then you call Zuhana and say, how are you going to vote on this? And you call Carla and say, how are you going to vote on this? You've now connected 4 different people and asked them how they're going to vote, and now we violate the Open Meetings Act. So the reason for this is, again, we want all official business to be done in public so the public can see how you deliberate on an important matter of policy. Now, if we do the same exact thing and you meet in the hallway or you make phone calls and talk about the Patriots game on Sunday night or the World Cup coming up, that doesn't violate the Open Meetings Act because that has nothing to do with your agenda. So you can talk about politics, you can talk about religion, you can talk about sports, but if you're talking about something that is on your agenda, material, that's where you get in trouble. You can talk about anything else you want to. In fact, I'm sure Sarah would encourage you to socialize, talk about kids and family and community, all of those things. But the minute you start talking about the agenda of your board is where you get in trouble.
Can I ask one question about that?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, is anyone driving a white Honda Accord in your park in the back?
Yeah, that would be mine.
If you could please move it, I'll have someone move it.
Oh, that's some service right there.
Thank you.
Someone have a question?
I did, I
Yeah.
have a question. You said if it's on the agenda, so if it's something generally about the school or the district, can we talk, if it's with more than 4 people, are we violating that?
Yeah, jump in. Yeah, go ahead.
So if it's a matter of business that's going to be discussed before the board, either has been discussed, is set to be discussed at a notice meeting, or will be potentially discussed in the future, then that's a topic that could constitute a violation.
And this, that's a bit of a gray area, so use your best judgment. If you're sitting around Kids Count, going through their book, and you're like, wow, attendance is really low, and you talk about it with your fellow board members, it's not on the agenda, it's not going to be on the agenda, you're just like passionate about it, like, we should do something about this, that doesn't violate the Meetings Act. But if you know a month from now, an issue's going to come up, it's not on your agenda yet, but you know it's going to be on the agenda, everyone knows it's going to be on the agenda, and you start talking about it, that's where you know, or reasonably, a reasonable person would know that it would appear on the agenda. So all these conversations, again, means phone, text, email, in person, all the ways that we communicate with the chat, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Facebook, all of the above. If 4 or more of you are talking to each other, that is a bad thing. So avoid that. And always, if you have a question, feel free to reach out. I'm the city's lawyer. I'm available. Everyone has my cell phone. Everyone has my email. Charlie will make himself available as well. So we're always here to answer any questions. Now, there are more requirements under the Rhode Island Open Meetings Act. The biggest one is that there's a 48-hour requirement, which means you can't meet without giving the public 48 hours notice. Recently, the law was changed to exclude weekends and holidays. So that means if you want to meet on a Monday, you have to post it by Thursday, because then Friday counts, but the weekend doesn't count. Saturday and Sunday don't count. Or if there's a holiday, that doesn't count. Does that make sense?
When you say post that, you post that where?
Good question. So you have to post it to the Secretary of State's website and in one other physical location, which we'll post it usually at the door, front door of City Hall. You all can subscribe to the Central Falls School Board account on the Secretary of State's website, and it will send you an email when the agenda gets posted. So you'll see that. So it happens where a public board like yourself, well, there'll be a mistake and your agenda won't get posted 48 hours before. It happens, it probably will happen, and you just have to reschedule the meeting. You can't meet. And those agendas that have to be posted 48 hours in advance have to include the date, time, location of the agenda.
Can I add something on that point?
Of course.
I don't know if you're anticipating having all of your board meetings here, or if you're going to have them, either in school or some other location. But, what I've encountered in my experience representing other school boards is that frequently, we have a secured entrance for most either schools or administrative offices. So the purpose of a public meeting is to allow access for the public. So we have to ensure that there's at least there's got to be 2 points of entry for the public so that they can attend the meeting. That's even after the meeting has commenced. So sometimes I'll notice that doors are shut or locked after the meeting has begun. You still have to make the forum accessible to the public throughout the entirety of the meeting. So ensure that you have 2 open means of egress for the public for any meeting that you're holding.
Great. Now we're going to get into a couple of the more complicated issues with this law. One is called, this is the slide, OMA agenda requirements. So the agenda, your agenda, has to be specific as to what you're voting on, deliberating on, or you may be in violation of the law and any vote you take may not count. So for example, if you, let's say you have an agenda item that says discussion regarding air conditioning policies in the Central Falls schools. And then at the meeting, you talk about potential vendors to be the air conditioning vendors for the city, and then you vote on an air conditioning vendor for the school district. Do you think that's a valid vote? The answer is no, because the public has to know exactly what you're going to do, or it violates the law. So if you want to vote on something, you have to use the words vote, or a lot of legislative bodies like yourself use the word consideration. So if you want to vote on something, you have to say possible vote on air conditioning vendors for Central Falls schools. And then typically you have to get even more specific, and you have to list the vendors who are being considered and who your recommendation is. You want to be able to look at the agenda and say, I know exactly what they're going to vote on. If you don't know exactly what the vote is going to be on, you probably are too vague or too ambiguous. The people who bring complaints about this are often members of the public, and then they will make a complaint that you violated the Open Meetings Act. It will go to the Attorney General of Rhode Island. They, once a month, put out 5 or 6 decisions on how public bodies all over Rhode Island violated Open Meetings Act. This happens frequently, and those decisions are available. They host a training every summer, it's usually the last week of June or first week of July. We'll invite you if you want to go, if that kind of thing excites you to hear these decisions. Happy to have you go. But a lot of it has to do with what's on the agenda being too vague and too ambiguous. So we want to be very specific on the agenda. Now we move into executive session. Raise your hand if you've ever been in executive session before or know what that means. Great.
Is that when you move away from the public
Yeah.
and have a meeting within the board?
Perfect. So, in this room where the city council meets, typically, to go into executive session, you can do one of two ways. You can have the public leave the room, or you can go in that back conference room there. And this is when you want to discuss confidential matters that you don't want in the public domain yet. Now, you may ask yourself, well, everything should be public. What should not be public? Well, sometimes you want to evaluate the job performance of an employee, and you don't want the world to know about that. Or you want to do an investigation, or you may want to talk about potentially buying real estate. And if the owner of that real estate knew you were talking about it, they may raise their price. So the statute gives you 5 or 6 reasons why you can go into executive session. But here's the key point. Here's what the public does need to know. They need to know why you're going into executive session. You have to keep minutes while you're in the executive session. Now you can seal the minutes, or you can make the minutes public. Typically you seal them. Now, and if you take any votes in executive session, you have to report that out to the public so the public knows how you voted in executive session, so it's part of the record.
Can I jump in on this?
Yeah.
There are a couple subsections of the statute that are specifically applicable to school committees as well. So discussions regarding student disciplinary proceedings, those hearings are conducted in executive session. Those are closed session hearings, so the public is not available for
You said student what?
disciplinary proceedings. So if there's a suspension or an expulsion of a student, that would be something that you would consider in executive session. Staff meetings regarding school security, if you're having a briefing and you want to ensure that you have revisited the school safety plan and you know what the plan is in the event of an intruder or a shooter, all of those conversations will be held in executive session for purposes of the safety of the students. And then sessions pertaining to collective bargaining, outlining your strategy for negotiations, those sessions would be held in executive session. So those are a few that are specific to, the last one not necessarily specific to school committees, but many other boards and commissions won't have to address those matters, but you will. So those you want to be familiar with it should be held in executive session.
I still have questions.
I have a question. I'm a bit confused because Matthew mentioned that we can vote in an executive session, but do we have to post it in the agenda that we will be voting in executive sessions?
Typically, you will put, you have to report out if you voted. You don't necessarily need to have it on, you have to have the reason you go into executive session. So as Charles pointed out, that can be about student disciplinary records, or it can be about collective bargaining. You have to state the reason you're going in, and when you come out, if you did take a vote, you have to report out how you voted. But you may not know whether you're going to vote on something, and so it doesn't need to be front-ended on the agenda. In fact, the fact that you may or may not go into an executive session is typically not on the agenda. You have the right to go into an executive session at any time in a meeting. But you do have to report out if there's a vote.
And I think you have this portion here. We'll find out this. So just in terms of, I mean, there may be occasions, like I said, in those limited circumstances where you're going to take votes in executive session. But I think the practice, as noted in the PowerPoint presentation, is that the final votes, you're ideally going to be taking those after you come out of executive session. So you'll discuss the matter in executive session, and then when you come out, there'll be a motion and a vote that will take place in the open session portion of it, with the limited exceptions of certain matters in executive session where you're going to report those votes out.
Can I follow up with a question? Because I'm trying to understand, because we did say when we studied that if an item was to be voted on, it needed to be like upfront, people should know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that play out with an executive session and a vote?
Yeah, you're going to have a notice item for a matter that there'll be a notice item.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if that's on. There we go. There'll be a notice item. That's really, yeah. I'm going to project it and just try and get everybody in the back. Okay. So there'll be a notice item that you'll have on the agenda for discussion related to school safety plan. You'll convene an executive session, we'll discuss the school safety plan. If you're going to you're either going to take a vote with an executive session and you're going to report that vote out, or, which is a better practice, you're going to discuss the matter in executive session, and then you're going to take a motion and vote on the school safety plan when you come out. So the public will be aware of what you're discussing, even though they won't be present for the discussion.
And I would just add that executive session is a right that you have, but you don't need to exercise it. In fact, I encourage you to have as much public conversation as you can. You can go into executive session, it doesn't mean you have to. Without any other question?
So when you talk about school safety, collective bargaining, and student discipline, those we have to go into executive session for. But I can remember in years past, if there was an employee situation, the school board of trustees used to go into executive session. Does that fall under that same?
Yeah, there's actually a separate subsection as it relates to if someone's job performance is going to be discussed in executive session. So typically what will happen is you'll make the election to have that discussion in executive session, but the statute actually requires that you afford the individual the opportunity to have it heard in either open or executive session. So they'll send you a notification if they want to have it heard in open session, and then you actually have an obligation to have it heard in open session. But there's a unique qualifier with that particular subsection.
And a lot of this will be building the plane on the way. You're not going to learn all the answers here today. You're not going to learn all the answers next month. As I said, we're going to be working together and figuring out these problems together. So the next slide are common violations, which we've already discussed. Email or text message deliberations, avoid them. If you're trying to talk to the whole board, a lot of times, if the clerk or the secretary emails out an agenda, someone might be inclined to hit reply all and say, here's what I think about agenda item so-and-so. Just resist that urge, and please don't do that. Also, improper executive session discussions, that's a common finding by the Attorney General. So what that means is, if you go into executive session to talk about a school security plan like Charles referenced, and then you have a whole separate 30-minute conversation about something else that has nothing to do with school safety. You gotta stick to the reason you're in executive session. And then finally, the most common violation are agendas that are vague or ambiguous, and you end up voting on something that wasn't properly put on the agenda.
Could I have one more?
Another thing that I've seen frequently in practice is that there'll be some initiative the board wants to support, and the board will send some type of correspondence, or the leadership of the board will send correspondence that we're supportive of X, Y, and Z. The leadership of the board cannot speak for the entirety of the board outside of a properly convened meeting. So if you want to send a letter in support of, state legislation X, Y, and Z, that has to be a topic that's discussed at the board meeting and decided by the board collectively to do that. The leadership cannot assert that they're speaking on behalf of the board. They could speak on behalf of board leadership, but I've had cases where there's been suggested OMA violations where they've said, there's nothing in the minutes of the board that indicates that they ever discussed this. So the board leadership, speaks either in their capacity as individuals or leaders of the board, but they cannot speak as the board unless that's been properly discussed collectively.
So the last slide of the Open Meetings Act, I just put a scenario. Scenario one is 2 board members text back and forth during a meeting about how they're going to vote on an agenda item. Is that a violation?
Yes.
Why do you say no?
One is that you might find someone that's an expert in a different area, like for example, a teacher, someone who's been in district, and you just want to feedback and see how that helps you make up your mind.
Carla, you said yes. What was your reason for that?
I think that it wouldn't be transparent. It wouldn't be a transparent scenario, so I think everyone has to have their own judgment when it comes to voting.
So 2 people texting with each other about how they're going to vote does not violate the Open Meetings Act. But if 4 people text together, or if you text 3 other people about how they're going to vote, that does violate it, because now you've talked to a quorum of the board. So long as you're below that quorum number, you're fine. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. So let's say, quick scenario, I text Suhana and text, would that include, and then state, I wouldn't text 3, but it would be like a chain reaction. What would that would violate as well?
That's all.
So that was what I referred to earlier as the rolling quorum. If you knowingly try to count the votes of something and be sneaky about it and be like, I talked to so-and-so and they talked to so-and-so, they gave a telephone, that constitutes a quorum of 4 people. Now, if you talk to Dorian and ask him how he's going to vote, then you have no knowledge that he then asked someone else how they're going to vote, but you have no knowledge of that, you didn't find out about it, different story. But if there's a little game of telephone where you're all finding out how you're going to vote, you're all part of that, that would be a rolling quorum that violates it.
Okay.
Again, the spirit of this law is that the public should see you deliberate publicly. They want to know why you're voting yes, why you're voting no. They want to see you talk about it and give you reasons. But they don't want it done in secret. That's the Open Meetings Act. Any other questions before we move on to public records?
I have one last.
Yeah, one last as well. So say that I reply to each one of my colleagues individually. Am I violating say that there's a group email and then instead of hitting reply all, I'm going to reply to each one of them. for say feedback or say an opinion or how I feel about something? Am I violating that?
Absolutely, yes. If it's an issue that's on your agenda, was on your agenda, is on your agenda, or likely to be on your agenda, the answer is yes. If it's just about scheduling the meeting, no. If it's about scheduling, if it's about the weather, if it's about news, if it's about kids, you're fine. And I will say, like, you can together talk about scheduling. That has nothing to do with what's on your agenda. If you're like, I can't do Mondays at this time, that's fine. But if you get to the heart of what you're talking about, you can't do that. Carla?
My question was more on when it comes to writing down the topics that will be on the agenda. When do we decide that? Do we have to decide that in the meeting before, in the meeting we've had before, or do we sit down and talk about what we're going to talk about in the next meeting?
Excellent question, and that is later on something in my presentation, but the chair sets the agenda. So Mr. Ray sets the agenda. Typically, you will, as a group, adopt rules of how you will operate as a school board, and those rules will typically say if you meet on Mondays, the Monday before the Monday that you meet, all members should submit to the chair items they want on the agenda. And then he gives them to the clerk makes the agenda, and posts it to the Secretary of State's website. But you can decide whether you want 7 days notice, 10 days notice. You can decide what you want your rules to be.
I have a question to piggyback off of
Sure.
your answer to that one, and then a separate question. If there is something that we send to the board that we want on the agenda, and it comes with documents that we want the board members, is that part of what has to be submitted to the Secretary of State for the public?
Typically, only the agenda is posted to the Secretary of State website, and the packet, which has supporting documentation, will be circulated to the board and then available to the public in the meeting itself.
Thank you. And then my second question, I don't know if this is the time or if this would be later, but public comment has to be part of open meeting, correct, or no? And does it have to? Is public comment always at the end and board members are not ever supposed to respond to comment?
Public comment is one of the most hotly contested issue of every public meeting in Rhode Island. In your rules, you can decide when and where public comment should be on your agenda, how long it should be, if you limit people, whether there's a timer, whether you respond, whether you don't respond. It's up to you as a body. Certainly, Charlie would have his opinion, I would have my opinion. But something to think about, and as you move forward and develop your rules, you may want, to think, what do other school boards do around? They put them at the beginning, they put them at the end, how do they kind of police it? But that's really up to you.
Can I just pause because some folks are trying to hear your really smart questions and I'm not sure your mics are on. Can you guys, and when you ask, can you speak into it because you're asking incredibly smart questions and I hope you keep going on questions also because we're here to learn, so. Okay.
That's the Open Meetings Act, but if you think of a question, you want to come back to it, feel free to jump in. The next law is called the Access to Public Records Act. And similar to the Open Meetings Act, this is about the public having access to documents that you use to make decisions. So, generally speaking, any document that's a part of government may be available to the public. So, for example, if you left tonight and said, oh, that lawyer Matt's kind of an interesting fella, and tomorrow you go on your computer and you say, I want all of Matt's emails for the last 2 years. Guess what? I work for the government. My salary is paid for by the public. You have a right to access my emails. I have to print them all out, put them on a file, and send them to you, and then you can go through all my very boring legal-based emails. And that's generally true of most of government. So this is the purpose of the Access to Public Records Act on this slide. Guaranteeing public access to government records, promoting transparency, and it balances openness with privacy protections. And I'll get into that in a minute of how it's balanced. But I just want to highlight the general point here is that your emails, your text messages, your conversations, your letters may be made public if it's part of your official duties as a school board member. I'll get into there are many exemptions which may carve you out of that. But I want you thinking about what you do, what email do you use for the school board? Do you have a city email or do you have a personal email? Personal cell phone, things like this, that it may be opened up if someone makes a request for information. Now, there was a case, I'll let Charlie tell that story. That's the purpose of the Access to Public Records Act. Now, what is a public record? I've already talked about this a little bit, but any document made or received in public business. So, if you have something on your agenda, and there's a document, Jordana, for example, you said there's an agenda item, and there's supporting documentation. All of that is a public record which members of the public may get. Emails, text messages, drafts, notes. The public record applies no matter what device is used, computer, phone, etc. Now, there's exemptions. Raise your hand if you were elected. There should be a little more. Just say that. So, and raise your hand if you were appointed. Okay. So, under the Access to Public Records Act, there's a subsection M called the Elected Officials Exemption, which says if you're an elected official, i.e. the four of you who were elected, official correspondence to and from you may be exempt. So if people email you or text you in your official capacity, you may choose to not provide that to someone who asks for it. Now, do you want to tell me something?
Which one?
The appointed versus the elected.
Yeah, so I think
What's interesting is Providence has a similar setup. And, half of our membership is appointed and half is elected. And it's the obligation of the part of the law department and the people that represent you to be responsive to public records requests. And we get them all the time. We get thousands in the city of Providence annually. And frequently, I'll have to go to a board member and say, I need to know if you have any text messages on this topic or something that's responsive to this. And no one likes to provide their personal cell phone to an attorney to start to go through anything or ask you to produce certain text messages or emails that you may have. So, I think what we always recommend is that, keep that separation. Keep the separation of your personal cell phone or your personal email account, because ultimately, I may have to go through, or Matt would have to go through messages, emails, and when you're responding to these documents, there's a treasure trove, and you get email correspondence from all sorts of sources, and you can see, this person is making comments about this. It can be embarrassing, because ultimately, it's not just official record that you're going through. You're going through a treasure trove of correspondence. So maintain that separation as best you can, because it avoids that invasion or that intrusive aspect of it. So keep, the text messages, if you have a business-related phone, keep them on the business-related phone, your elected official phone. Keep the emails on your separate central calls account from your personal account. This way, you can avoid that issue, because then you have, comments about former employees, superintendent, and all of it, potentially releasable to the general public.
Is there, you're going to get a distinction between appointed APRA versus elected?
Yeah, I think Matt hit the nail on the head in terms of that.
So there was a situation in Providence where someone sent, so Access to the Public Records Act people call it APRA. So someone sent an APRA to Providence and said, I want text messages and emails, and it was one appointed and one elected. Because the elected could be exempt, because they were elected, they didn't have to provide their information, but the appointed ones, so this is important, appointed ones, you don't have that exemption as an appointed official. We here in the city have an APRA coordinator, so under the law, you can't respond to an APRA request unless you're certified. You go to that annual training from the Attorney General's office. That's Lisa Diaz, who sits right here in the HR office. My office works with her to review it. You'll see here on the slide, APRA response obligations that typically have 10 business days to respond. So business days means a weekday, so typically that's generally 2 calendar weeks. And then if you have good cause, in other words, you're inundated with requests, or you don't have capacity, or you're looking at how many hours it takes to find all of this information, you can request an additional 20 calendar days, which is an additional 4 calendar weeks. So you may have up to 6 calendar weeks to respond, depending on the nature of the request.
And those, like, when you said going through like text messages, that is between board members or anybody? So if you said to your husband, like after a meeting or before a meeting, I'm like, you know, we're gonna be voting on whatever tonight, I'm really stressed about it, I hope the board goes in, you know, this way, would that be something, or is it just strictly?
So there's a balance between, well, I would say there's 2 issues you raise. One, is it in your official scope of duties? So is your communication part of your official scope? I would say if you're in a text message thread with your husband, that is not in your official scope of duties. It's a text message to another board member, it's a text message to a city hall staffer, official board duties. So that's line 1. Line 2 is personal privacy. And I think a marital relationship or a familiar relationship, that those kinds of privileges would come into play here. So be careful about how you're communicating with your fellow board members, with members of the public who are interested in a matter, who are speaking in public comment or otherwise attending a meeting, or communicating with government officials.
And just the last question I have for that, for the APRA, is that done at the local or municipal state level? For example, the person that works here at the city hall, does she handle the city staff and a mayor? And what about the school, the superintendent, and that kind of records?
The school district has their own APRA coordinator. I don't know who it is, but this Lisa and the law department handle all city boards and commissions. So if anyone submits an APRA for the zoning board, the planning board, the school board, we will assist you, we will help you. We're your lawyers.
The mayor is exempt because she's elected.
Correct.
Per se, okay. Right.
I have a question. In regards to APRA, if the request results in like a considerable cost, like as far as like it's going to cost the school board or the city so much, can you put that cost on the person requesting?
Absolutely. So we have to offer the first 10 hours.
It's just the first hour, and then, and then it's.
We have to upfront handle the costs of retrieval, review, and the provision of those documents. But if it's a major request, in other words, if someone wants 5 years worth of emails and I gotta go to the IT department and do a search for emails, and then I gotta go through every email and redact it, and I know it's gonna approximately take 22 hours, it allows me to bill $15 an hour times 22 minus the first hour. And then I'll email that request and say to that person, it's going to cost $380. We're going to put your request on pause until you provide payment. When you provide payment, the clock will start again and we'll provide your response.
Mr. Evans,
Yeah.
you can use the microphone.
Will the school board be, have the option to, get a city appointed email address?
I'm sorry?
Will the school board have the option to get a city appointed email address?
Yes, I would encourage it, I highly encourage it.
My question was, so we're talking about. My question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My question was, as a board, can we ask for an APRA from
As a
someone that works for the city?
As a
Or as
any member of the public.
any member of the school?
Any member of the public can submit an APRA request.
But if as a board we submit one, how would you go about the cost? That would be all.
In terms of information, I think, I don't think I can speak for the city, but I think we would just coordinate the cost. Like if you're seeking information in pursuit of your duties as a board member, I don't think we would charge you anything for that. That's not a public records request. That's you obtaining information to better service the public. That's something that I think we would assist you to do. So, in terms of that, I don't think there would be a need to submit an APRA request tonight.
One good example that I like to use for this is, you see the police officers wearing the body worn camera? You see them on the street, they have the camera right here. They have an obligation for that camera to be on when they're, well, Thomas, you know, when they're interacting with the public. And that camera, and that records the video and sometimes the audio of every interaction they have. And then that way they're accountable to the public. So similarly, everything that you do, imagine that you have a camera that's recording what you're doing. That's what these laws are about. For the public to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, in your official capacity. Again, there's a slide on here with exemptions. We do not provide records that violate student rights, that violate parent rights, that violate HIPAA rights, your healthcare rights, that violate your personal privacy, or otherwise violate attorney-client privilege. So I'll give you an example of what typically happens in the city. A reporter will submit a request, like Channel 10 just submitted a request for, where are all the speed cameras in Central Falls? How many violations have they given out? Give me a report on how many convictions versus non-convictions, blah, blah, blah. So then Lisa, the APRA coordinator, will track down all that information. She'll create a folder, and her and I will go through it together and say, is there any information in here, social security numbers, phone numbers, home addresses, license plate numbers, VIN numbers, anything that's confidential, personal, or otherwise should be redacted. And we'll take a black marker and redact that information, and then we'll provide it to the reporter. So even though a document may have confidential information on it, we still turn it over. This happens all with police reports. Police reports have dates of birth, social security numbers, important law enforcement investigation information. We will redact it and then provide it. So again, this will be a learning curve. We're all in this together. We'll figure it out. And if you have any other questions, one more thing. If you hear about a records request that's come in, do not then delete what the request is requesting. As you probably know by now, in this world, nothing can be deleted. Everything is recoverable. So, as your lawyers, we'll work with you to figure it out, but I encourage you never to respond out of embarrassment or shame and just delete something, because that will make things far worse. In other words, intentional behavior, like deleting a public record after the fact, is significantly more punishable under the law than perhaps a slightly embarrassing record. And we can work with you on figuring it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, can I just add something to that.
And I know that there's several apps now that have disappearing messages. Please do not do any official communication on Signal or or Snapchat. Don't be like my 14-year-old daughter and have communications that no one can find on Snapchat. That's just not a good response to an inquiry from the Attorney General's office in terms of their investigation as to a potential APRA violation.
So can I just clarify, anything that we request from the school district is, we can request directly, doesn't have to go through this, and they are obligated to provide us with what we are requesting in a certain time frame as well. Just like this is the 2-week a day required to do it in that same time frame.
Excellent question, and I think as you work through this board having actual authority over the district and the old board kind of phasing out and you're phasing in, you're going to probably want to have a conversation with the superintendent and her team about your records request, and will she agree to provide records in a certain time frame, or does she want you to submit them formally as an APRA request? You can certainly leave here and submit 10 requests to the superintendent, and they have to follow APRA. One thing that APRA says is if it smells like an APRA and looks like an APRA, treat it like an APRA. You don't have to use magic words. You don't have to say, under the Access to Public Records Act, I hereby, do declare the following. If you just say, I'm requesting these records, please send them to me. They have to treat it like an APRA. 10 business days.
Yeah, and the way this usually comes up is, at the next meeting, superintendent, I'd love a presentation on this, and I want you to walk me through some of the demographics you have or some of the data you have regarding, student improvement within this criteria. So can you please present to us on this topic and have material ready so that we can review it? That's how it typically comes up. So if that's the type of material you're really looking for, that's typically how it will come up in the context of you're making this request, so at the next meeting, I'd like to see this information. And maybe the superintendent says, probably need a little more time, but you just coordinate it that way where you're making the request at the meeting for the documents and the presentation from the administration.
But if it's something to review like policy and we want to create new policy, that kind of stuff, that we want that background information.
And we're going to help you with that. I think part of the next training, I understand there's going to be a few of these, is going to be like a school committee 101 training. So part of your responsibility will be to develop policy on behalf of the district. So, that repository of district policy should be readily available already to you and to the public. And you'll have an opportunity to review those. And then, if it's not, I think probably there should be an effort to make sure that everybody can see exactly what policies are in effect, just by going on the website or having them readily available. But I would imagine if you just went to the administration, they would have a book of policies that they could probably allow you to take a look at and inspect.
And side note, it's specific to Central Falls, would it be RIDE that has a lot of the substance they had control, or would it be?
I don't believe so. I think all of it should still be housed within the Central Falls District Administration. That's just based on my understanding of the relationship between them, right?
What I've tried to do as solicitor at Central Falls over the last 10 years is when I respond to a APRA request, I will put it on the internet. So if someone then asks me the same question, I'll just direct them to the internet. I think the more that we can put on the internet for the public to see or for reporters to see, the better. But that's something for you all to think about. Yes?
One thing we haven't heard is if there is a definite timing that things should be provided when you request and drop off. Is there a definite does it have to be 6 weeks or?
It has to be responded to in 10 business days.
10 business.
Which is 2 weeks.
Okay.
But then you can, if I get 20 APRA requests, which we've been getting a lot of for various reasons in the city right now, I can then request a 20 business day extension. All right. Moving on to ethics. As members of the Central Falls School Board, you have to abide by Rhode Island ethics laws, and the city of Central Falls has its own ethics laws as well. The ethics laws here in Rhode Island are so important that they were put into our Constitution, and I'm going to read you what Article 3 says in our Constitution. The people of the state of Rhode Island believe that public officials and employees must adhere to the highest standards of ethical conduct, respect the public trust and the rights of all persons, be open, accountable, and responsive, avoid the appearance of impropriety, and not use their position for private gain or advantage. Now, prior to the city going into bankruptcy, we had a mayor here who exchanged his powers of being mayor for personal favors at his house, and then he went to prison for it. So as a result of that, the city passed very strong ethical laws. But similarly, Rhode Island has had many instances of elected officials doing criminal things, abusing their power. So we passed very strong Rhode Island ethical laws as well. These laws apply to you as members of the school board and generally prohibits what I would say what you learned when you were 8, 9, 10 years old. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. And under the stolen category is, I think, the biggest issue for ethical conduct is conflicts of interest. And we're here again as your lawyers to help you think through these. I'm on the phone with the ethics lawyers all the time. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? They're helpful. They were here last night giving a training to the city council. But I'll give just a straightforward example. If a member of the board has a brother who runs a snowplow company, do you think you as a board member should be able to vote on giving that snowplow company a contract? No, because you cannot exercise your official duties to benefit yourself financially or any member of your family. Now, you may say, well, what about my niece? Does the niece count? What about, a stepson? Does a stepson count? We can get into those granular details because there's case law about every single issue like that. But generally speaking, the golden rule here is don't vote on something that you have any interest in. And we can help you work through that. Another example is, let's say you're on the board of a nonprofit organization. And that nonprofit organization is on your agenda to get a grant from the school department. Should you vote on that? Now it seems pretty harmless. You're doing the right thing, you're supporting a nonprofit, the nonprofit is getting some money, but no, you can't. Because you can't also vote for something that doesn't benefit you, your family, or your employer, or an organization for which you're on the board.
Would that have to, that be something if, obviously Central Falls is a very small community.
Right.
And the school district is, and as a former educator, if I have a close personal relationship with a current educator and we have to discuss their job performance or something along those lines, or a family member or somebody, another board member knows, do we have to recuse ourselves from that? Is that violating? Or do we have to just make that publicly known?
So you can recuse for reasons other than the ethics code if you feel like you need to recuse. But if you do not have what's known as a business relationship or a material interest with that friend, you don't have to recuse. You can still choose to recuse because they're a colleague or a friend, etc. But
And you have to make that known. Is that something that you do have to make public? Even if you don't recuse yourself, let the board know, we're going to be discussing so-and-so, and that person is my son's godmother, but very close,
Yeah, I think it depends upon whether you feel as if it's going to interfere with your independent judgment. and your ability to make an independent decision on that. If you do, and I was nodding my head because if you do recuse, you have an obligation to fill out a recusal form. Okay, so if there's a vote that you're going to recuse on, we usually maintain forms, I think Matt has forms here, that we maintain, that you'll have to fill out and note the recusal for.
I have a question. So,
Carla, just real quick, so when you do a recusal, you're gonna get a form from the clerk, you're gonna fill it out, and then we encourage you to step off of the dais and not be a part of the discussion, so that it's clear to the public that you're officially away from the discussion. I'm sorry, go ahead.
so I know some of us in this board have kids in the system. So if our kid goes to a certain school, we're making a decision on that school. What happens there? Do we recuse from voting? Because that's, some of us in this board are in that situation, so how?
So one of the more controversial elements of the ethics, well, let me back up for a second. There's an ethics commission in Rhode Island that oversees the enforcement of the ethics laws. So a lot of times, we will help members of a board or staff send what's called an advisory opinion to the ethics commission, and the ethics commission will say, Carla, your son or daughter goes to X school. You may or may not vote on issues impacting that school. You have an opinion. Now you can't be in violation because they've told you what the ethical roadmap looks like. So those advisory opinions are on their website and they go back 20 plus years. And typically, if you search, you'll be able to find a situation that very closely mirrors your own, and that'll provide you an ethical roadmap where you ask me or you ask Charles, and we can help you find that. Where I was going to at the start of my comment was to say one of the more controversial elements of this is what's called the class exception. What does the class exception mean? What it means is if you are part of a large group of people who are parents of children who go to that school, then your decision, since it's part of a large class of people, is not going to be held accountable to you. And the way that this has been interpreted by the Ethics Commission is as follows. If you're a senator in Rhode Island, and you vote on a budget that includes funding for your school district, or you're a teacher. So let's say you're a senator from Central Falls. You're voting on a budget that includes funding for Central Falls schools, which pays for your salary. Should you recuse from that vote? The Ethics Commission says, yeah, you could, but we're not going to require you to, because there are so many teachers, and the class is so large that your decision is not meaningful, it's not going to change anything, it's part of this larger class. That's a bit in the weeds, and we're happy to kind of walk you through that. But the short answer is, for the most part, if you're a parent at one of the schools here, unless you're making a decision on something that impacts your child or their classroom, it's a very narrow decision. Just because you're making policy that impacts that school, you would be exempt as a class, and it would not impact your ability to vote on that matter.
No, that's good.
Conflicts of interest slide outlined what we've talked about. There's 3 major conflicts of interest. Number 1, financial interest has to do with money. Number 2, business or professional relationships. Again, whether you're on a nonprofit board, whether you know someone, you're in business with someone. And then number 3, family connections. The next slide, prohibited conduct. There was a gift policy that said if you're a member of the school board, you can't accept a gift from someone who has what they call a material interest in your official duties. So think teachers, think people who work at Central Falls School Department, people who have a say or want to have a say in what you do. So a teacher, for example, can't take you out for margaritas on a Friday and pay for more than $25. Now, they just changed the $25 gift limit to, they changed 25 to 50. So there's an annual gift limit of $50. One time, no more, the limit is $50, the annual limit is $150. If you have any questions about that, just let us know.
It's really silly, but say that teacher has been your long-time friend, and you have ways to prove that she always treats you to drinks, years prior, and stuff like that, then, and she can no longer treat you.
We are officially. You guys see on the outside.
Oh, no.
She's like, I quit. What I would say is that the teacher should not provide a gift to a school board member above $50 per instance, above $150 a year. Also, it's also prohibited to use your official title to receive any kind of benefit. So, you can't go to Dunkin' Donuts and say, hey, I'm on the school board, give me free donuts. A lot of this is kind of, common sense, right? Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. Don't use your office for personal gain. Generally speaking with ethics, just talk to us and we can help you work through a problem. I'm cognizant that we're approaching 6:30, so I'm going to kind of just cut to the Central Falls Ethical Framework. So Central Falls has similar ethical responsibilities, which you are all required to follow. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but they're really not different from the state. The last thing I want to leave you with is all of the mayors, senior staff, myself included, Alberto included, we have to fill out an ethics form every year. And Thomas, you probably have done this in your past years already. You will now need to do this, probably a year from now. But it's an annual ethics financial disclosure form. You have to disclose what are your financial interests. And every elected official in Rhode Island, every appointed official in Rhode Island, every board commission member, every government senior staffer has to fill these out. Because it allows the government to know what are your financial interests so that they can keep an eye on whether you're voting to further your financial interests or be corrupt or anything like that. Or make a stable coin in your wife's name. No, just kidding. Again, we're here to help you with that. When you receive those forms and you have any questions, feel free to reach out. The last section we're going to discuss tonight is kind of what we talked about earlier in regards to public comment. This section is called Why Formal Rules Matter. You as a board can think about how you put items on the agenda, where public comment is, how often someone can speak on a topic. The Central Falls City Council has rules. They're about 20 pages. Alberto City Clerk can provide them to you. You can go to other school boards in Rhode Island and get copies of their rules. But that's going to be one of the first things you want to do as a group is think about how do you want to run your meetings and what are the rules that are going to govern how you run your meetings. And Charlie can be a great resource for that from his work with other school boards as well, giving you examples for that. But that's everything from decorum. What if someone comes in and starts yelling from the back of the room? What do you do? One of your colleagues on the board starts speaking for 10 minutes, they just keep going forever. How you set the agenda, how you vote, how you recuse, etc. And then I do have a link on here for the city council rules. So you can find those on the internet as well.
Matt, quick question.
Yeah.
In forming the rules, Do we have to do that in an open meeting format, or can we work on that as a group? How does that work?
Ooh, good question. So, your rules are a material, important way in which you run your meetings. So, the adoption of those rules and the vote on those rules have to be done in a public meeting. Now, you can ask staff to give you 3 or 4 different options, and then in the meeting you deliberate, you cross them off, you amend it, you vote on it, but ultimately it's got to be voted on in a public meeting.
And usually those take the form of some approved bylaws that you develop collectively as a board. So, part of legal counsel's role would be to work with board leadership on developing bylaws and then having the entire board review those, consider them, see if they work as a way to, conduct ourselves during the course of the meetings, and then pass some set of bylaws that generally the public is aware of, so they know that they don't have 10 minutes for public comment or something to that effect.
That was a lot of information, and you don't need to memorize it all tonight. There's no quiz tonight or tomorrow. But the important thing here is that in your official duties as school board members, you are covered by legal counsel. So we are your lawyers. We have to defend you. We have to go to court for you. We have to represent you in depositions. We're here for you. You have attorney-client privilege with us. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out anytime.
One question, when you say you can ask staff, who is staff? That's either Sarah or staff?
Sarah, yeah.
And I am prepared to help support all of this, like in terms of draft bylaws to put in front of you and working with them to make sure that it's responsive to the vision that you guys have too, that.
Great.
Because this is a new board and so many things are going to be created hopefully by us, policies, the rules, like you, Dorian said, would that be something that we could go into executive session for? To have those larger, before we vote on it, but just to have those bigger discussions on what we want, kind of our vision of what the board is going to set up like?
Do you want me to tackle that?
Or is that?
Generally, no. Yeah, there wouldn't be a permissible basis to go into executive session. So those conversations will generally be an open session, but typically they start with a draft set that the board leadership directs some staff member to prepare.
For example, if you direct Sarah or Charles or myself to draft bylaws, if you picked up the phone and said, "Hey Matt, here are my thoughts on this section," that's fine. But generally, you want the public to see how you deliberate on what the rules are and what should be included and not included.
I do want to make sure you attend the rest of the thing, and you guys need to get to, I don't know if you're saying that. Okay, so we're going to continue on with the presentations and discussion, and we'll be kind of circling back to all of the content throughout the next 6 months, so I just want to reiterate what Matt said about that was a lot, and actually the next piece is a bit of a lot too, so we're not intending to like inundate you, but they're just, we want to introduce some major important information early on, but we'll keep coming back to it, okay? So before we move over to Dr. Amanda Aiken, who's going to be working with you guys on the foundations of community-centered board governance, which will be a little bit more interactive than what we, in terms of talking to each other a little bit, more like we did last time as a group. I just wanted to direct you in your packets to, first remind you guys that last time when we were together, which was, let's say, a different energy because it was our first time together, right? And you weren't up here, you were kind of in more of a training mode down here. We focused a lot and started out by talking about the strength of the relationships of this group and working well as a team And if you remember, because it was before the holidays and a lot of time has passed, we worked on, we started out by just having a little time for you guys to get to know each other on a more personal level. So we are gonna take a couple minutes to do a little bit of that before we move into the next section. And also as a reminder, we went through that exercise where we talked about different communication, learning, and conflict styles. Is it coming back to you? So some people identified, like Crystal was in the east where she needs to see the big picture. I know we had some people who identified over in the south where they want to make sure all the voices are heard. We had some west folks. I'm looking at you, Dorian, I think, and Thomas. And then Carla, you were in the north of action oriented, ready to get stuff done. And so I'm reminding you because while the substance and the content and the technical information that you're learning is really important, foundationally what is also important is that we are a learning group in charge of a learning system, and we're modeling learning. So we're not modeling knowing everything, right? Because our schools are places where our kids are trying to learn, our teachers need to always be learning, the people who run the schools have to also be learning from the people that are in the classrooms. And you guys, as a school board, are kind of like the leaders of all that learning culture. And so I want you, I don't imagine that information is potentially feels intimidating and we're all up on this thing now. I'm gonna try to help us retain the feeling and the culture that we're a team and we're here to learn and model learning, even while we start to do it in a more formal kind of setting. Does that make sense? Okay.
Do you mind if I get
So-
one of these?
What?
Do you mind if I get this packet?
That is yours. Everything in front
No,
of you.
this is Savannah's. I didn't get one.
Oh, sorry about that. So, but before you move into Amanda's, yes, I can give you that. What I want you guys to do is just take a minute in your packet. There's also, I don't know why I'm using a microphone. It's really weird. I'm right next to you. So in your packet, before you get to that, after the minutes, and yes, thank you. There should be something that looks like this conversation, Neil, and then something else that talks about process requests and needs.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so take a minute to just turn to the person next to you, and hopefully it's someone different than you sat next to last time. And if not, try to mix it up a little, okay? And pick one of those and just be a human for a second and let's shake it out a little because that was pretty intense. That was real, which is also awesome.
Yes.
That was you know how
you guys are
lunch, the
really.
ice lunch? That was that ice lunch.
I know, but you know what? You crushed it, and you're good. So, and Crystal, you can jump into this conversation, okay? So, so if you guys can just take a minute. Let's keep getting to know each other a little bit, and then, and once you're done with that, take a minute and look at that other document, the process needs and requests, just to remind yourself of what you guys said you need from one another.